Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks, where we meet with the top thought leaders and strategists in emerging technologies, digital assets, the regulatory landscape, and capital markets. I'm your host, Jill Malandrino, and joining me on the desk at the Nasdaq market site, we have Andy Marsh, CEO of Nasdaq-listed Plug Power, and Frank Wolak, CEO of the Fuel Cell and Hydrogen Energy Association. We are here to discuss how industry demand and policy alignment will accelerate hydrogen adoption across multiple regions. It's great to have the both of you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks. Frank, I want to kick this off and provide some context around it from the U.S. perspective, where we are with hydrogen and adopting that as a source of energy.
Sure. Well, where we are today really is in a state of moving from policy formation to more of an implementation and execution. Over the past several years, going back 5, 6, 7 years, the industry has been working with Congress to develop policies to look at implementing hydrogen pathways. And now we're at a point where we've achieved some policy certainty, and we're now beginning to see the execution of real assets being deployed. And so that's really the next test case of development of hydrogen for fuels, for industrial and export technologies, ammonia, clean ammonia. And so that's kind of where the industry is right now.
Yeah. So and Frank, I'm going to just mention, Frank, you did a lot of work in the BBB for fuel cell policy with hydrogen production tax credit, and fuel cell tax credit, which is really important.
Yeah, I mean, that's an example of where we have drawn a conclusion. The OBBBA this year had some features that were sort of the culmination of many policy steps. We had a continuation of the 45B tax credit, which allows for hydrogen to get a tax credit. We also had what is a very positive outcome is fuel cell technology achieved a 30% investment tax credit, which will last for the next 10 years. And that's kind of a really great stepping stone for deploying fuel cells and fuel cells technology in these power applications and large AI demand.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge catalyst behind it, for sure. From the global perspective, Andy, any similarities, differences?
Oh, well, I think globally, they talk more about climate change. And one of the real focus is electrolyzers, which are a device that actually takes water and power and splits it into hydrogen and oxygen. And it's used in many places like the oil refining industry, green ammonia, green methanol, SAF. I'm sure you have lots of discussion about sustainable aviation fuel. It's happening around the world. And the policies have been put in place in places like Europe and Australia and Chile, which is really to promote these technologies. And I'll give you an example with Plug. UK has a very aggressive program. We closed 45 megawatts of deal with a company called Carlton Power, which essentially is taking green energy, creating green hydrogen, and Kimberly-Clark is using it in their process in the UK. So this is real stuff happening today that we're engaged with, and many of Frank's members are engaged with.
Yeah, which is interesting, Frank, because the renewable energy or alternative forms of energy, that conversation has certainly been reinvigorated because of the AI demand and emerging technologies that we're seeing out there.
Yeah, well, that's key, and it's also not just about renewables. I mean, one of the things we just talked about with the fuel cell power technologies, they can operate on natural gas, they can also operate on hydrogen. So you have this clean resource that can be deployed at scale and in modular form that can be applied at very large applications for data centers, or in the trickle-down effect that's happening, because the more we consume power, the more that there are vulnerabilities and resiliency issues all the way down the food chain. And so you have a technology like a fuel cell that can operate not just in the renewable side or in the pure hydrogen side, but also on the natural gas side that is available to be meeting demands.
Yeah, which I think makes practical sense as well. You want to make sure you have redundancies in place, right, Andy, rather than having, okay, it's going to be this one source of energy, these mandates are in place. You have to have redundancies.
Well, it's a long journey, and you know, you absolutely need to keep cities like New York City running. You're not going to move that to renewables overnight, but ultimately most of it will be renewables. And when you start thinking about, and one of the reasons around the world people think a lot about national security, and you know, that's not just a US issue, but you know, you think about Europe, how does Europe become energy independent? And really there, it's a combination of renewables, nuclear power, And our products like electrolyzers, and we make lots of fuel cells too, they actually become loads on the grid at night when the power is there and nothing can be done with it.
Yeah.
You take a place like Germany, in May of last year, 20% of the time the cost was negative. Our electrolyzers could be creating hydrogen using that electricity during that time. And that's where, when you start thinking about networks, that it's really, really important that fuel cells and hydrogen probably ultimately represent 15 to 20% of world's energy,
Yeah.
and how it interacts with the electrical grid.
Well, it's interesting because you had brought up, Times Square, New York City.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone could see in the background here just how much this area demands.
I didn't have to tell people it was Times Square, probably.
But to put it into context, how much power does that take every day, as an example?
Oh, boy, I suspect, you have your nuclear power plant that nobody loves up the river here, and that probably is not sufficient to power this whole city.
Wow.
And I know we've looked at times what it takes just to power the subway system. I can't tell you what that number is exactly, but it's astronomical.
Yeah, and these things that we take for granted every day, which is why it's encouraging, because of policy shifts and demand, that you're going from pilot to practical applications. Yeah.
And let me tell you, in practical applications, I can just rattle off, we have 80,000 fuel cells running in Walmart and Amazon distribution centers that move goods, and it actually takes power off the grid. We've actually estimated we've taken 400 megawatts off the grid with our deployment of products. In Europe, we have deployments with people like Iberdrola and BP, where they're using green hydrogen instead of gray hydrogen. So these are not theoretical activities. One, you're in the oil refinery business. Two, you're putting 30% of products in the United States for food, for retail. Actually, somewhere along the line, a Plug Power product touches that. So this is real stuff today.
Yeah, I also think it goes back to, Frank, the national security conversation as well. Just, it shows how critical this type of infrastructure is.
Well, it is. I mean, the more that we require more and more power, there's more vulnerability, there's more issues with resiliency, you need more solutions. And even though in the past 4 or 5 years, the subject of hydrogen and fuel cell technologies kind of become more predominant, the technologies have been ready for years. And so now we're just beginning to see, because of these market demands for more power, the solutions are becoming more evident, more apparent. And you'll see more and more of these technologies deployed, because we have to have solutions to meet these demands.
Yeah, and Andy,
Frank, and you were in Korea recently with about 100 companies talking about hydrogen and fuel cells around the world.
Yeah, there was a major policy event out in Korea early December, and much of the subject around the world was around hydrogen, or going on around the world was how our hydrogen technology is going to become ready to meet demands depending on the various markets. And there is a lot of global activity in the space that the U.S. is in a competitive place for, and our policies have to kind of keep showing that we can advance ourselves, because the rest of the world is not stopping.
Yeah, and Andy, you make a great point in your notes here that it's about measurable outcomes at this point, rather than just these big types of announcements.
I am a Nasdaq company. I suspect my investors want measurable outcomes, and and look, last year we deployed 145 megawatts worth of electrolyzers. No one else in the world have deployed that many PEM electrolyzers last year. Our investors should be seeing that in the results.
Yeah.
And that, it's a business that, 2 years ago was about $5 million in revenue and should be close to $200 million for 2025 and continuing to grow. So yes, measurable results are what, boards want, what investors want. And look, and with the energy demand expanding around the world, and as you mentioned, there's all sorts of solutions to these problems, and hydrogen and fuel cells are an important ingredient for the world for the long term.
Yeah,
Andy, you also mentioned measurable results. Policymakers want measurable results. Regardless of what Congress is in power, they want to see that the policies that have been implemented have actually achieved something. And your ability to get more and more policy diversity and new policies enacted is based upon how successful you are. And right now, this industry in the United States is at a pivotal point where there are investments going in the ground, there's capital being deployed, There is, you'll begin to see assets coming in places like Louisiana and Texas that didn't exist 2 or 3 years ago. That is the measure of policy success. And so we're really looking forward to demonstrating that.
Frankie, you actually make a great point, because I was down in Louisiana with Senator Cassidy for a huge energy event. And Senator Cassidy essentially said, we need all the technologies. And we operate a large hydrogen plant with a petrochemical company in Louisiana, Owen, where we take their waste stream and create good hydrogen for use of our customers.
Yeah.
You know, people like Walmart, as I mentioned before.
Yeah.
So this is not theoretical activity. It's real stuff today. And as Frank said, the policymakers really are looking to see results. And I think companies like Plug and many of other Frank's members are actually beginning to deliver results.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so critical about the alignment between policy and industrial demand when you think about it through the investment lens, right? To bring down that risk and to have some light at the end of the tunnel for these capitalized projects that take a long time to come to fruition.
Oh.
And, you know, especially with massive infrastructure.
So you actually hit it on the head. And when you start thinking about some of the projects we're working on a 3 gigawatt project in Uzbekistan. We're working on a 3 gigawatt project in Australia. You know, these are $6, $7 billion, 50-year investments. These things can take time to make sure all the I's are dotted, all the T's are crossed, both from a technical point of view and obviously from an investor point of view. Yeah. And I think what investors are going to see in 2026, many of these projects which have been under development over the last 3 to 4 years are reaching final investment decisions. We're working on 8 gigawatts worth of projects, and think about a gigawatt, it'd be about $1 billion each. Not all of them are going to hit, Jill, but that's really kind of the world we're living in today.
Yeah.
There is a major change about to happen because the work has been done for the long term. This isn't a daily roulette wheel. This is a long-term planning, real long-term deployments, and these projects last for 50 years.
Yeah.
And
I think it also shows the value of public-private partnerships to execute.
Well, it does. And again, going back to my point about the policy metrics, that policymakers want to see success. They want to know that what they've done yields that multiplier effect of investment happening. And also, when you think about the gigawatts of investment Andy referred to being billions of dollars, the hydrogen community had really undescribably small level of investment 5 or 6, 7 years ago, except for traditional hydrogen that was being made. And so as we begin to scale up, those investments are going to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. And by any measurement, that's success, because you're going from a small level to a very high level rapidly. And you know, that brings capital, brings technology players together, and it also is going to show the policymakers that this is really good to have stimulated in the first place.
Yeah, and Andy, here's more of a practical operating question for you. We hear a lot about U.S. infrastructure that it's 40, 50 years old, and that it needs to be fixed before we can even think about new projects. With the technology that Plug Power is deploying as an example, does it have the ability to be sustainable in terms of long-termism and adaptability?
So the plant we built in Georgia is going to be there 50, 60 years from now. I mean, this is not theoretical. This is actually practical work. So yes, it will be there for the long term, but probably more important is that it can help us short term. You know, I mentioned with our, you know, not the sexiest business in the world, but our material handling business where we're powering forklift trucks, we're actually using waste streams of hydrogen, which was just going to be burned off in the air, cleaning it up and operating those facilities where, you know, essentially, as I mentioned earlier in this talk, we've taken 400 megawatts off the grid. And as we continue to grow the business, you actually don't have to build more plants. You actually can use waste that's generated today to create energy. And
rather than flaring it off.
Yeah, instead of flaring, you almost can think about it as an energy efficiency play. Right. From a whole system point of view.
This longevity also isn't just in the production side of it. It's in the end users. You know, whether fuel cells, whether they're made by Fuel Cell Energy, Plug Power, Bloom Energy, they're modular and scalable. And once they're in place, they're essentially perpetual. Because even if they go through a certain level of 20 years of duration, you're going to be continuing to improve them. And as long as the demand is there at the end using site, the technologies can be evergreen.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're hearing the word modular a lot as it relates to evolving the energy landscape, for sure. All right, appreciate both of your insights. Thanks for joining us on Trade Talks. And thanks for joining me from MarketSite. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.